Hello Brighouse High School and welcome to this lesson which is going to be focusing on the cardiovascular system. Hopefully by the end of today's lesson we'll be able to do a number of different things. The first thing is you'll be able to tell me about the three primary functions of the cardiovascular system. You'll also understand the structure and design of the cardiovascular system within the body, and you'll be able to analyse how it's used to improve performance in sport. So, the cardiovascular system, which is also known as the circulatory system, is made up of three main parts. We have the heart, blood vessels, and blood. Now, the number 3 plays a significant role when we're learning about the cardiovascular system because apart from having three main parts, it also has three main functions. The main functions are to transport oxygen and nutrients around the body, form blood clots on open wounds using something called platelets, and it also maintains the body's core temperature at approximately 37 degrees Celsius. So let's look into this in a bit more detail. So the cardiovascular system circulates blood around the body, and it's this blood which carries oxygen and nutrients to the main parts such as all the vital organs and the major muscles. As well as delivering oxygen and nutrients, it also carries away waste products such as carbon dioxide and lactic acid, which is a byproduct of something that is formed in the muscles once we begin exercising. It's obviously very, very important to anybody who's taking part in sport, therefore, because as we start to exercise, the muscles demand or require more oxygen. As that demand increases, the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system delivers that oxygen to the muscles so that we can exercise to our best ability. Equally, as we've already said, that lactic acid builds up in the muscles, so when we begin to exercise, the cardiovascular system takes that away. The structure of the cardiovascular system in relation to how it delivers those oxygen and nutrients is shown in this diagram here. If we start at number 1 represents the heart. And if you notice on this point here, we're going to be focusing on the red arrows. So the blood is oxygenated, which basically means that it is carrying oxygen. And once it leaves the heart, it then delivers it to all areas of the body, including major organs and muscles. Once it gets to this point, which is where the number 2 is identified, it travels through something called capillaries, which are these mesh-like structures which cover all of the organs and all of the muscles. And once it gets to this point, it drops the oxygen and nutrients off. Once it's dropped the oxygen and nutrients off, this blood then becomes deoxygenated, so it's containing no oxygen, and it needs to go and pick some more oxygen up so it can repeat the process. It does that at the lungs. So once that oxygen has been dropped off, the blood travels back to the lungs, collects oxygen, goes back down to the heart, and the system and process starts all over again. So the second function of the cardiovascular system is blood clotting. And if you look into the image on the right hand side, you can see a small animation of how this works as I explain. So blood contains specific cells called platelets, and it's these platelets which form clots to help stop bleeding and reduce the risk of infection getting inside of the body. When a blood vessel becomes damaged, let's say you have a nosebleed, signals are sent to the platelets within the blood, who then rush to the site and begin to clot, which covers that open wound up, and it's probably most recognisable when you see a scab formed on the skin. This is obviously more essential in some sports than others. So sports where open wounds are common, so things like rugby, boxing, mixed martial arts, because this allows the performers to prevent high degree of blood loss, it heals wounds, and it reduces the risk of disease and illness through infection, because those open wounds are closed up, so no foreign bodies can get into the body. So temperature regulation is probably the most obscure one, but it's probably one of the most important. So blood vessels within our body help control the body's temperature either by expanding in width or narrowing in width, and this either releases heat or retains heat within the body. Now we use very specific terms to describe when blood vessels either expand or narrow. Vasodilation is the word we use when blood vessels expand, so they get wider, and that brings them closer to the skin. And the easiest way to identify this is when you are exercising quite extensively, you will notice your blood vessels come to the surface of your skin, and that's not only to allow more blood flow to get to the muscles, but it's also to allow heat to escape. The opposite of vasodilation is vasoconstriction, so the blood vessels get narrower, and this means they're further away from the skin, and therefore heat is retained by the body. This image here shows the difference between vasoconstriction and vasodilation. The image on the left, the blood vessels are rather narrow and they're further away from the skin, therefore heat is retained. Vasodilation, when the blood vessels get wider, they're closer to the skin's surface, so heat can easily escape and cool the body down. It's really important that the body's maintained at a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, because if it gets too hot, then that can lead to many different health issues and reduced performance in sport. Now, it's really important that we understand the structure of the cardiovascular system and how it is formed and how that allows us to perform. Now, the heart is central to the cardiovascular system, and this allows it to perform all its main functions by pumping blood to different areas of the body. It's designed in a particular way so it can do multiple things simultaneously. So as we know, it contains a muscle called cardiac muscle, which maintains a constant rhythmic beat. It has 4 different chambers which hold blood simultaneously at the same time. It receives the blood back from 2 different destinations, so blood comes back from the rest of the body and also from the lungs. And it pumps different forms of blood to 2 different destinations, so we have oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. So, we need to understand the structure of the heart, we need to understand the names of the different chambers, the names of the different valves, but also we need to understand how blood travels through the heart. So, blood returns to the heart deoxygenated, which means it contains no oxygen, because it's been around the body, it's dropped the oxygen off the muscles and the different organs, and now it needs to start that process again. It comes back in the heart through the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, and it comes and sits in the right atrium. After that point, it travels through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle and is pumped out of the pulmonary artery towards the lungs. The pulmonary artery is attached to the lungs, and it's at this point where the blood travels to the lungs to collect more oxygen and nutrients so that it can be then repumped back to all areas of the body. Having been to the lungs, it comes and re-enters the heart through the pulmonary vein. And from the pulmonary vein, it will pool in the left atrium. Once in the left atrium, it will travel downwards through what's known as the bicuspid valve, and it will sit into the left ventricle. Once in the left ventricle, it's pumped upwards out of the aorta, and the aorta has 3 different exits, each of which are then linked to numerous different blood vessels so that oxygenated blood can be delivered to all essential areas that it is required. You need to understand the way in which blood travels around the heart, as I say, as well as the different parts of the heart, the valves, and all the different arteries and veins. So it's a really important piece of information to take your time with and learn. These are just some key terms that I've discussed whilst explaining it to you. So again, it's important that you pause the video, make sure you understand all the different terms and where those are placed in the heart. This is the right hand side of the heart, so this is where the blood enters deoxygenated. And these are the key terms of the left hand side of the heart. So once the blood's come back from the lungs, it's oxygenated, and this is the part of the heart that sends it to the rest of the body. So pause the video, keep going back and forth until you know all of the major terms, as well as the blood flow around the heart. So, blood vessels. Blood vessels basically form the network system that all blood is transported around the body. It's basically like a road network within the body that all our blood travels around. There are 3 different types of blood vessel in the body, and they each have a specific function. We have arteries, capillaries, and veins. Now, arteries are responsible for carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart and delivering oxygen and nutrients to the main parts. Capillaries are attached to arteries, and these are the mesh-like structure which is laid over all the muscles and all of the organs, and this is where the oxygen is dropped off and the carbon dioxide and all the other waste products are picked up. This is kind of the exchange period. Veins carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart and lungs so that the process can start all over again. And it's very, very important you understand what each of the blood vessels does. So again, if we use this image here, the image which shows the red lines, these are signed as arteries. So these are carrying oxygenated blood to the major muscles and organs. The mesh-like structure are the capillaries, where the oxygen is dropped off and the carbon dioxide is picked up. And the blue lines here are veins, and they're carrying deoxygenated blood back to the heart and lungs so it can become reoxygenated and the whole thing can start again. Now, within blood, which is made up of millions of microscopic cells travelling around the cardiovascular system, there are 4 specific cells within the red liquid that we would commonly associate with blood. We have red blood cells, and these are responsible for carrying oxygen and nutrients, so they pick up the oxygen themselves. We have white blood cells, and they're in the blood there to fight disease and infection. We have platelets, which we've discussed before, which form blood clots to prevent blood loss. And we also have something called plasma, which actually forms the highest percentage within the blood, and this is the liquid part of blood that allows it to travel as a liquid around the cardiovascular system. So, let's see if we know more and remember more. Can you identify the 3 main components that make up the cardiovascular system? Can you describe the 3 primary or main functions of the cardiovascular system within the body? Can you explain to somebody what vasodilation and vasoconstriction is? Could you label a blank diagram of the heart and discuss how blood is transported through the heart? And lastly, could you interpret this diagram and explain how the structure of the cardiovascular system helps performance in sport? If you're able to do those things, then you've done a great job of learning all the material, and you should do really well in the tasks that are going to be set. Thank you very much.